So I'll say that I have a very, I think, unique process. I've talked to many people about this, and I tell every one of my buyers when I am going to provide a P&L for a business. Hey, this is what I think. This is what I think this business is going to do. It's always the beginning of the conversation. It's not the end. It's not this is what this business is going to do, so we should pay this multiple off of this net. It's the beginning of the conversation. Early on, I decided that I wanted to be able to compare businesses apples to apples. So there are things I didn't include and did include and kind of took data, extrapolated it in my own way that would be different than what other people do. And if you had other people on, they would say, dude, Rick Dunn doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. Like, you can't do that. So good for them. This is just the way that I start the conversation, and I want to come up with an end net amount based on a very insightful conversation over multiple times with a buyer. And before we start negotiating on businesses, when I'm having that initial conversation with a buyer, I want them to understand how these numbers are relevant. It's the most important conversation. And the first thing I want to do is ensure that that buyer is very familiar with the FedEx space and educated on the runs and how they differ to be able to compare two different businesses. Nobody's looking at just one business, they're looking at two. And so the numbers that I enter into BizQuest, Biz Buy Sell, my P&L, they can be very different than, like what Root Consultants is going to enter. And that can be very different than what like another broker decides to put. And that can be very different than what a traditional business broker, non-FedEx sells. Like they're going to have a different way they come up with their numbers. And that's going to be different than your accountant, your CPA is going to come up with, which is going to be different than what, your SBA lender is going to do. So it's different. So I want to see the A1 and I want to separate fact from fiction. And over the past 2 years, it's been a very exciting, like action-packed novel that was being written about FedEx line haul. There's so much extra runs, so many extra miles, and that's line haul. Like explosive growth is why you want to get into line haul. So that's for most of the time, it's very possible, but it was a bit extreme the last couple of years. So I got to take out, some of those numbers that I don't think we're going to be able to achieve anymore, especially in the local. A1, let's look at the revenue that the runs are going to do. And it's important to note that you look at that A1 and you'll see that solo AM run scheduled for 8 days out of the week, 7 days out of the week. And we can run the numbers based on 7 days, but then we have to look at the settlement statement. And we have to make sure that run is running 7 days. And if it's only running 5 days, and we're only giving it 5 days. And that's very typical. You'll see a 7-day run on the A1. It's running 5 days. During peak season, it ramps up to a sixth and possibly a seventh day. So how do what numbers are we putting in there? I'm putting in 5 days, not 7 days, because we know it's not running for 7 days. So we take the revenue we generate off of the settlement statement, and we know what that business is going to bring in. Now we have to come up with our expenses, right? What's your biggest expense, Ryan?
My biggest expense, payroll.
Boom, payroll. We got to consider payroll. Where am I getting those numbers from? Payroll journal, right? So if I didn't have a payroll journal, where can I get that number from? I'm okay asking a seller, like, hey, what do you pay your guys? 60 cents a mile, 65 cents a mile. Okay, I can do the payroll calculations, the taxes. I know what it's going to be. And then there's workers' comp. I can come up with a payroll amount. But there's workers' comp. So if I'm looking at history and payroll journals and tax returns, and I'm considering workers' comp, we got a big problem there. The amount I pay for workers' comp is going to be different than the amount a new person pays coming on board. Workers' comp goes down as you continue to run a successful business. So somebody new with a brand new business is going to have a higher workers' comp rate. So I can't take actual figures that have been, for the past however long on workers' comp because it's not accurate. So what do? I probably call Dave or Joel up at CIA just because, I know they're going to text me back immediately and say, hey, what do I include on this on my P&L? Oh, well, Mississippi is going to be 4 cents per dollar and, New Jersey is going to be 17 cents. But, if we can use the previous person's data, we can get that down. So I want to get, that's a huge expense, workers' comp, especially in certain states. So that number we have to nail down. The next thing is fuel, right? And fuel is a huge topic. Now you have people, John Haldy, even Becky at Line Hall Central. There's some people who remove fuel out of the equation completely, and I don't, and I'm very okay with that. If we just ignore the fuel, for a seller, you're going to kind of lowball the value of their business or their net, because most of us are making a profit on the fuel surcharge. If you leave the fuel surcharge off because you're leaving the fuel expense off, especially if businesses that run heavy spots, you're not going to take into account some profitability. So I don't do that, but I do recognize fuel can be problematic. Let me ask you this. If you're selling your business, how would you include fuel in it? Now, if we look at 2022, we have a year full of volatile peaks and valleys when it comes to fuel. If you leave out certain times of the year, you're going to run into some problems if you're trying to be honest with that number, trying to predict the future, forecast what it's going to be. So we do use it and we say it, but I don't love that number. It's very easy to take some settlement statements, dump them into Haldy Tech, Ground Force, and come up with, what this business spent on fuel over a period of time. Now, if I am an unscrupulous seller and I wanted to game the system, it'd be very easy for me to lower my fuel costs because I just wouldn't run certain transactions through the system, through the FedEx system. I'd go have my driver pay cash. Hey, use this credit card for this run. And do people do it? I don't think so. Could I do it? Yes. And if there's the opportunity for dishonesty, I think there's going to be players in any market that's going to take advantage of it. Oh yeah, this truck, this 2007 Cascadia that happens to have FCAM on it, gets 7.5 miles per gallon. Yeah, look at it. Look at the numbers. Does no. It doesn't. So when it comes to fuel, I very, very controversially use a number, a percentage, a ratio that I deem to be appropriate for that truck on that run in that market. And the number is going to be anywhere from 24 to 33%. But it's the only way that I've comfortably come up with, and a lot of times the numbers that we're using off the revenue are dependent on the fuel surcharge that's being applied at the time. So I'm changing that number based on my revenue. And we have a little formula matrix that we've come up with that it works pretty well. And it's pretty accurate when you compare it to any of the other softwares that are coming up with, margins on fuel, ratios on fuel. But it's a number that I'm coming up with and I try to shoot high, 1 or 2%. But fuel, I think, is a topic we need to continue to talk about in terms of how we value these businesses, because there's ways to game it. And depending on the trucks, if you're selling your business because you decided to go buy, expensive leased trucks and it doesn't make sense, and we're selling your business, but we're not going to include the trucks in that. So a new buyer has to come up with their own trucks, which happens a lot in my businesses. I rarely include trucks in my sales. I want good trucks. I want the right trucks on the right runs. Well, the 22 Max that you're running are going to get different fuel efficiency than the 18 International day cab that we're putting on this run, because that's the run that makes sense for it. So why am I going to use your numbers? They're not accurate to me. How do I come up with my numbers? Got to use a fuel ratio. There's fuel, and then there's the trucks, right? The truck expense, it's very easy to come up with. It's what it is right now if you're taking over the truck. If you're financing trucks, obviously you're going to AP Financial. They're the best. And we're going to use, actual data that we know, because everybody uses you guys. So I have lots of data to pull from. I know what the rate's going to be. I know what the term's going to be on multiple different trucks. So it's easy to come up with. Then we're adding in a couple of little excess type stuff, def fuel, if the business is going to run, no, we're not even including a manager in that, because I want apples to apples. Not all businesses need a manager. Not all businesses need extras. And I want to come up with that value. What did I determine that net to be? So now I have a system that whatever business we're comparing it to, we have an apples to apples type comparison for that business. And it doesn't include other numbers. Now, the important thing to note is I am taking that number, assuming a driver runs every day out of the year, no breakdowns, no sick days, no weather delays. I want that number based on a perfect year. Is that accurate? No. My numbers, I tell people, the first thing I say is there's nothing about my numbers that are accurate to you. This is just the beginning of a conversation. I'm including things in there that in a perfect scenario that we know won't be there. But I'm not including things in there that we know we're going to do. Those slip seating, those trucks, the extra spots that you're going to get during peak season, running extra trucks, all the peak bonus money that you're going to get, the extra truck that you're going to run. I'm not including any of those numbers in there. And I'd say 95% of the time, I'm lowballing the net because I think that it's the only way to really value a business. And yes, I know there's people that will sell a run that's done the same thing for the last 3 years. And you can look at settlement statements and it runs perfectly, but it was never put on the schedule. Why was it never put on the schedule? Why do I not see this on the A1 if it's been running consistently for 3 years? What is it? Like, I'll have the conversation. Oh, this market doesn't add, whatever it is. I'm not including it on my valuation. That turns sellers off to me. People won't come to me over that reason, and I'm okay with it, but I'm not using that. We come up with a net and we come up with something that we think makes a lot of sense, and we determine a multiple on that. And not all multiples, like there's really great runs. Like there's runs I call white whales, which are AM dedicated runs, solos, doing over 550 miles a day. And they run 6 days a week, not 5, not 7. They consistently run six days, and during peak, they'll probably ramp up to 7 days. That's my highest multiple I'm giving. I'll give those a 4.5 times X all day long. So if you see one of those businesses for sale, you should pay 4.5 times X. I know you can get a 2.5, 3.5 times X off of another business, but so what? Take the perfect run that everybody's been chasing and take an extra year to pay it off, and have that run build an entire business around the infrastructure that run's going to create for you. And so the multiples, it's not always 3, it's not always 4. It's whatever we determine the ease of ownership to be for that business, and the demand that I know that business is going to have. And at the end, we come up with a value, and I think it's pretty fair for both sides. And that's what we're looking for, fair. I want a really, really attractive price for a really good business. And I want a buyer who's willing to pay for that business, that good business.